The wind carried nothing but the smell of wet ash and distant smoke. Somewhere in the darkness below, a horse screamed, short, sharp, then cut off. On the ridges above the Ager Falernus, Roman sentries tightened their grip on their shields. They could feel the trap closing. Below them, crammed into the narrow valley floor, Hannibal's army had nowhere left to run. It was 217 BCE. The summer heat had given way to damp autumn nights, and Rome's greatest fear had finally been contained. For months, Hannibal had marched through Italy like a ghost with an army, burning, flanking, and crushing every legion sent to stop him. But one Roman refused to play the game. General Quintus Fabius Maximus, nicknamed the Delayer, would not meet Hannibal in open battle. Instead, he shadowed the Carthaginian army, cutting supply lines, blocking roads, and waiting for a single mistake. Now that mistake had come. Hannibal had led his forces into the Ager Falernus, a fertile valley on the northern bank of the Volturnus River, thinking he could plunder and escape. But Fabius had moved fast. He seized every mountain pass leading out of the valley. The Romans planted themselves on the high ground, overlooking the single narrow exits. From above, they could see the Carthaginian campfires flickering below like trapped fireflies. Hannibal's army, some 40,000 men, plus cavalry, baggage trains, and the spoils of half a dozen raids, was surrounded. The immediate consequence was suffocating. Food ran low, morale began to crack. Hannibal's officers whispered about breaking out through sheer force, charging the Roman positions in a suicidal frontal assault. But Hannibal refused. He knew Fabius wanted exactly that, bloody repulse that would destroy. Carthage's only army in Italy. Then came the new complication, the one Fabius had not planned for. Hannibal stopped looking at the passes. He started looking at the animals. Somewhere in the Carthaginian camp, a herdsman mentioned the oxen, 2,000 sturdy, lowing beasts, bred for heavy work, not war. Hannibal reportedly spent a long time staring at them. His officers saw nothing, but Hannibal saw torches. He saw confusion. He saw a way to turn Roman discipline into Roman panic. That night, the camp did not sleep. Men moved in silence, tying bundles of dry wood and resin-soaked kindling to the horns of every ox. The animals shifted nervously, sensing something wrong. Hannibal gave one order, passed in whispers. Wait for darkness. Wait for the moon to set. Then light everything. The moon had slipped behind the Apennines, leaving the valley in absolute black. Then one by one, small flames flickered to life. Among the Carthaginian tents, not torches held by soldiers, but fire tied to the heads of confused, snorting beasts. Hannibal stood in the darkness, watching his strange army take shape. 2,000 oxen, horns ablaze, were prodded toward the eastern slope. Their handlers whispered and shoved, guiding the herd away from the main body of the army. The animals did not want to climb. They balked, turned, lowed in protest, but hunger and goads pushed them forward. From the Roman positions on the heights, the effect was immediate and catastrophic. The first sentry who saw the lights assumed it was a cooking fire that had spread. But then more lights appeared, dozens, hundreds, a creeping river of flame, moving upward along the mountain's shoulder. Another guard shouted, then another. Within minutes, centurions were shaking men awake, pointing at the impossible sight. It had to be Hannibal's army. Who else would carry torches into the high passes at midnight? The Romans saw what they expected to see, a desperate enemy trying to sneak past them in the chaos of night. And that was Hannibal's true weapon. Not the fire, not the oxen, but Roman certainty. The consequence unfolded like a collapsing wall. Roman commanders abandoned their static defense. They had spent weeks waiting for Hannibal to make a move. And now here it was, a frantic, sloppy escape attempt straight up the steepest ridge. If they moved fast, they could cut him off, trap half his army on the exposed slope, and end the war in a single night. The order went out, leave the main pass, march toward the lights, kill everyone you find. But as the Romans scrambled through the dark, scrambling over rocks and roots, they discovered something wrong. The torches were not marching in formation. They zigzagged, they stopped, they scattered. And when the first Roman cohort reached the source of the flames, they found neither Carthaginian soldiers nor baggage trains, just terrified oxen, eyes rolling white in the firelight, bellowing as the burning kindling singed their own hides. The animals bolted, some charged straight into the Roman lines, horns still blazing, spreading panic and sparks. Now the complication escalated into outright disaster. While the Romans flailed against the stampeding herd, cutting down oxen, shouting orders that no one could hear, the real Carthaginian army had not moved at all. Hannibal kept his men motionless in the valley floor, listening to the distant chaos. He gave them nothing to do but wait. And when the last Roman unit had pulled away from the main pass, lured into the tangled nightmare of the eastern ridge, Hannibal finally raised his hand. A single whisper passed down the ranks. Silence. No torches, no drums, no voices, just the soft scuff of sandals on stone and the creak of leather as 40,000 men began to walk through the undefended pass. The main pass had no name worth remembering, just a rocky gash between two ridges, wide enough for 4 men to walk abreast, steep enough to break a cartwheel. But tonight, it was the most valuable piece of ground in Italy, and it sat utterly empty. No Roman sentries remained. Every available man had chased the phantom army up the eastern slope, leaving behind only cold campfires and half-eaten rations. Hannibal's vanguard reached the mouth of the pass just after midnight. They moved with their mouths shut, not even whispering. Behind them stretched the rest of the army. Libyan spearmen, Spanish swordsmen, Numidian light cavalry leading their horses by the muzzle to stop them from snorting. Slaves carried the wounded on litters made of cloaks. Mules loaded with plundered grain stepped carefully, one hoof at a time. The only sound was the occasional scrape of iron against stone. Sound that made every man freeze until he was certain no Roman had heard. The decision to move in total silence was not just tactical, it was psychological. Hannibal knew that Rome's greatest weakness was its confidence. The Romans had convinced themselves they were the hunters. They wanted to believe Hannibal was fleeing in panic. So Hannibal gave them exactly what they wanted, just far enough away from the real escape route. The immediate consequence was a slow, terrifying miracle. For 3 hours, the Carthaginian army threaded through the pass like a serpent. Through a crack in a wall, men stumbled in the dark. A single dropped shield could have alerted the nearest Roman patrol, but no shield fell. A coughing fit could have echoed off the cliffs, but men buried their faces in their cloaks and swallowed the sound. When one mule broke a leg and cried out, 3 soldiers killed it with a single, muffled knife thrust before the noise could carry. The animal's body was left where it fell. By the time the first gray light began to seep over the ridgeline, most of Hannibal's army had reached the northern plain, but the complication was still unfolding below. On the eastern ridge, the Roman soldiers had finally regained some order. They had slaughtered or scattered the oxen. Dawn revealed the truth. No Carthaginian corpses, no abandoned baggage, no signs of an army at all. Just a few hundred dead animals and hundreds of exhausted, furious Romans standing knee-deep in ash. A young tribune reportedly looked at the scene and said nothing for a long time. Then he turned and began running back toward the main pass. He reached it just as the sun cleared the mountains. The pass was empty of Carthaginians, but not of evidence. The ground was churned by thousands of footprints. Dried blood marked where the mule had died, and in the soft mud near the northern exit, someone had planted a single Carthaginian spear upright in the earth. Tied to its shaft was a strip of torn cloth. Some of the Romans who saw it thought it was an insult. Others thought it was a joke. One veteran knew the truth. It was a signature. Fabius reached the main pass just as the morning fog began to burn off. He had ridden through the night, summoned by a breathless messenger who could barely form the words, "They're gone." All of them. The Roman general sat on his horse at the mouth of the pass, staring at the trampled mud, the discarded ox carcasses rotting on the eastern slope, and the single Carthaginian spear still planted like a taunt. He did not shout. He did not rage. According to sources who later described the scene, Fabius simply closed his eyes for a long moment and said nothing. When he opened them again, his face betrayed nothing but exhaustion. The decision had already been made, hours ago, and not by him. By trusting what his own eyes had seen in the darkness. By abandoning the one position that actually mattered, Fabius had handed Hannibal exactly what the Carthaginian needed, an open door. Now came the immediate consequence, more bitter than any battlefield defeat. Scouts returned with reports that Hannibal's army was already 20 miles north, marching at a relaxed pace, their baggage trains intact, their wounded alive, their morale soaring. They had not just escaped. They had escaped easily. No rearguard action, no desperate last stand, just silence, darkness, and 2,000 confused oxen. The Roman army that stumbled back to their abandoned positions was a study in humiliation. Men who had been so certain they were moments from victory now sat on the rocky ground, staring at nothing. Some laughed, the hollow, broken laughter of soldiers, who realized they have been outthought by a man who wasn't even on the same mountain. Others quietly sharpened their swords, perhaps looking for something to kill. But there was no enemy left to fight, only the smoking remains of torches that had never been held by human hands. Then came the final complication, the twist that would echo through Roman military thinking for generations. Fabius ordered his army to march in pursuit, but Hannibal, now loose on the open plain, had no intention of fighting. He knew the Romans would be reckless, desperate to restore their pride. So he led them on a winding chase through hostile territory, burning bridges, setting ambushes, and always staying one valley ahead. Fabius would spend the rest of the campaign refusing to engage. Exactly his original strategy, but now seen not as wisdom, but as cowardice. The delayer had become the fool. Rome's Senate would soon strip him of his command. At dawn in the Ager Falernus, as the sun climbed over empty ridges, the only sound was the cawing of crows gathering around the dead oxen. Hannibal's army had vanished like smoke, and somewhere to the north, the man who had tricked an entire empire with livestock and fire was already planning his next move. Rome would never underestimate him again, but by the time they learned that lesson, they would lose 50,000 men at Cannae. The legacy of the Oxen ruse is not just tactical brilliance. It is Hannibal's understanding that war is fought in the mind, before it is fought on the field. While Fabius watched the mountains, Hannibal watched the Romans watching the mountains. And in that gap, between what they saw and what they believed, an entire army walked to freedom.